Hey, Chris, thanks for joining. Before we jump in, I just wanted for our audience to kind of talk about a little bit of your background, and then it'd be great to go into your post, which I thought was fantastic and had a lot of great lessons in terms of game development. But just kind of going over your background, which I think is pretty impressive, I'll just go over it really quickly. But production manager at Microsoft on Xbox, senior producer at Mojang, director of live and product at Relic. And by the way, I was at Sega before, so I know some of those Relic guys. Head of product at Offworld Industries, head of interactive at Misfits Gaming Group, and most recently, principal producer at Hypixel Studios. So I think it's fair to say you've got a fair amount of production experience, and I'm so glad that you've joined me today. But what I really wanted to talk with you about, and for our audience, is this post that you recently published on Medium called Structure Teams to Win. And I thought it'd be awesome to have a discussion about that post and to go into a little bit more depth about what that post is all about. And just to set the context for our audience, let me just read a little bit of the first part of your post, and then let's jump right into it. Okay, so I'm going to read from your post. Let me know if this sounds familiar. Centralized design teams churn out untenable or disconnected paper designs. Engineering receives rough specs and over-engineers solutions that don't meet the real need. Art departments generate assets without support or validation, leading to waste, endless iteration, or performance issues once they land in game. QA gets tossed broken builds with unclear test requirements, producing swaths of bugs that may or may not be useful. The list goes on. So let me pause right there. And let me also just to frame the discussion for our audience, maybe I could try to just give a high-level overview in terms of like some of the key points of your post, and then it'd be great to jump into it. But if I were to summarize your post at a high level, the way that I interpreted it was, so shifting team structures from something you call craft-based teams to outcome teams. So you're trying to optimize for product and the organization specifically. Then you also want to restructure teams for size and composition to be more effective, and you actually advocate a lot for cross-disciplinary teams. There's also a set of principles that you think that teams should follow that you believe are common in successful teams. You also then talk about a set of specific challenges that you think that teams should be aware of. And then you end with a specific example for a AA co-op shooter organizational structure that just selfishly, I'm very interested in as somebody who's working on that. But let me kind of pause right there and hand it over to you. But did I get that roughly right? Or is there anything else that we should talk about during our discussion today?
No, that was excellent. I think I would just add that I didn't capture every craft or discipline in games. There's plenty that also have their own maybe horror stories of being in tough organizational structures. But this was just a prompt for I see you and I hear you, and I was trying to figure out a better way as an organization and as a future industry. How do we operate better? So that was kind of the impetus for all of this.
Right. And then before we dive into a lot of the context and a lot of the lessons and things like that, I also wanted to just also understand, your motivation. Why did you write this post? And what was kind of why did you feel compelled to write about this topic, which I just to be clear, I think was really, really awesome and an important topics to be discussed in our industry.
Well, yeah, no, that's a great question. So I was curious to see how many bullets I could put in an article. I was 39. So I will have future articles in the future, and I'll try to reduce the amount of bullets. No, the motivation behind it really was, I've seen so much friction in game development before. I've seen continual trains of articles about, this studio is shut down, or there's a failure on this game, or what have you. And so many times I've seen different teams, from friends that I've talked to organizations that I've joined, where there's so much friction that's getting in the way of great people. And it's just so much of the root cause is a bad structure. And then a tendency is sometimes as leaders is we focus on the symptoms and not the root cause, which is our structure. So I'd go back and say again, it's usually not about the talent. It's usually about alignment and clarity and making sure that the team has the clarity needed to function well and the least amount of overhead as possible. So team design, in my opinion, is the foundation for pretty much everything else. And as leaders in game development, I think it's on us to address those problems versus the more fun problems, which is like, what's the cool new feature or hotness I can add to my game?
Right. And just to pull on this thread a little bit more, I completely agree with you, because when you look at the current macro of our industry today, what we're seeing is huge competition, right? We're seeing one, a glut of product, and because we are living in an attention economy, we've got so many things vying for players' attention. And we're seeing like some of these former models and the way that game development has been done for years just blindly followed without really trying to adapt for the new environment in which we're operating in. And so I think it's a little bit egotistical, in my opinion, to think that we should not really be having more introspection about how we operate and how do we optimize. And to your point about the importance of leadership and the importance of really thinking about how do we do this right, I don't know if you've read Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, but one of the things that he talks about is Team Boat 6, right? That they had these Navy SEAL guys racing boats. And then they took a last place team and a first place team, and they just switched the leads on those boats. And then the last place team became the first place team. So just an example of how if you take the right approach, that you could potentially dramatically impact the outcome or the potential to have a successful outcome. And so that's why I really I really liked your article, and it'd be great to kind of go into depth about this. But let's take like some of these issues from the top. And so maybe we can start with this notion of craft-based teams to outcome-based teams. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that? And obviously I'll put a link to your post for people to go into a lot more depth on that.
Awesome. So I use craft-based, but you could say cross-functional, you could say cross-discipline. I like craft specific more to games because I believe games are art, and so I like the idea of craft. That said, this is common across industries that are doing more agile kind of game development or have been influenced in some way by like Scrum or plenty of other kind of publications. So I think another recommendation that you've actually elevated before in prior podcasts was Team of Teams, and it was so interesting to read that book and hear the similarities between how a squad or a fire team in the military is cross-functional, cross-discipline, cross-craft. And we should, I think, based on so much of the learnings and best practices that have been very positive in outcomes, is that those teams work better. And so how can we apply that to games? I think part of this is not only their composition, but the fact that they need a very clear charter on what is their mission. Like, why do they exist? What are they working towards? In many cases, a team might be composed of maybe the right people, but maybe they don't know exactly what they're working towards.
Right.
And does that ladder up
sorry,
to a
Chris,
broader
can I just
product? Go ahead.
pause you right there just for our audience? And so could you give us an example for like a specific team? What would like a team-specific objective look like for you?
One that I've seen work well is, so here's an example. I've worked on multiple games now with procedurally generated worlds. So I think there's an example here where you could say a team focused on procedural worlds. So an outcome being every new world seed feels fresh, it's readable, it's performant. Traversal and discovery naturally surfaces your points of interest and resources and risks, and that's the goal of that team. So they're trying to build a new world seed, constantly generated, and something new and fresh. There's also easy ways that you can ladder this up to product expectations. So and actually design expectations. So for example, one that we had captured before was like biome novelty per minute or hour. So you could have an actual KPI against, as a player, I want to experience something new in a certain time duration. And so that gives the clarity to the team on the procedural worlds team of what they need to build. And hopefully that team has then been constructed with a designer, engineers, they've got artists, they've got everything that they need to go win in that mission. Versus what is more common, which would be that you'd have discipline-based silos where each that outcome that you're striving for has to be then kind of delegated and tasked out between monolithic different silos.
Right.
So and the handoffs, the games of telephone, the loss of fidelity of the intent gets lost between each one of them. And usually the partnership's not close enough to win in what we're asking them to do.
Right. And maybe if I can just jump in here a little bit as well, I think like what you're talking about is kind of it's a powerful concept, but I do think that it's underestimated how important having a very specific goal is. But it's kind of like the notion of having a North Star KPI in live ops, right? Like because the team is really oriented around something very specific, it's not like the goal being, hey, let's make a successful game. Then all sorts of people can be doing all sorts of things, right? And I've also talked about what I believe the coming like really important basis of competition for teams in the future is going to be product velocity. But without that more specific goal, you won't be vector aligned, right? And so you could have all these guys doing different things, but it's like, okay, what is the specific thing that we're trying to accomplish, or what is the biggest fire, the biggest problem that we're trying to resolve? So again, not to derail your what you're talking about, but I just really wanted to tell you that I resonate with what you're saying, and I think it's a very important concept.
Awesome. I do want to layer in here is that when I try to, if you're looking at the article, if you're looking at the organizational design that I came up with, I try to keep teams somewhat, kind of the teams, their composition, and their outcome that they're chasing somewhat immutable. So I shouldn't say immutable it means that it can never change. But what I'm trying to kind of convey here is what we don't want to do is continually change the goalpost for a team trying to deliver. So if their outcome is more broad and that's a huge component of your game, you'll need enemies, or you'll need a meta, or you'll need combat, or you'll need something that will be sustained where they can gain excellence in their area, a better understanding, they'll get a better relationship between their teams, and they won't have to continually to repeat the storming, forming, norming, performing cycle. So when I come up with some of these ideas around how do you anchor a group of people around an outcome, you try to keep it something that you're very confident in around you're going to ship this to and likely live operate it.
Right.
So I want to call that.
And maybe I can also follow up on this point too, because I think what you're saying is actually aligned with the concept of Scrum, right? Because when you think about a sprint, a sprint should resolve into a PSPI, a potentially shippable product increment. So if you're in a sprint and you're just continuously changing, oh, we're going to do this. Oh, no, we're going to do this. Oh, and then you just have confusion versus, and I've seen so many times, you end a sprint and you don't properly retro or reflect upon, okay, what do we have? Now, what information does that give us? And then we reorient around what's the next mission or things like that. So again, I just wanted to, there's a reason why I really liked your post, Chris. So anyway, please continue. And I would say maybe the next point I do want to touch upon is like the team composition and size, but do you have any other points in terms of the outcome-based teams?
I think I would want to leave this is to hopefully so it resonates with people who might be skeptical. Is that maybe a sports analogy, which I'm not going to give us. I mean, it could be football or soccer or what have you. Just imagine though, if it's American football, having or fielding a team that's just quarterbacks would absolutely get wrecked in any kind of competition. So arming a team with the right people, with the right skill sets to go win in their mission is critical. So I would try to hit that home that the team composition, not only the humans that make it up and do they get along well with each other, but also their skills that they can bring to the table. Can they actually execute in what you're asking them to do?
Right.
If the answer is yes, then I think you've done a really good job in terms of trying to organize a team.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to your point about really trying to understand what do you need, like what roles do you need? And I like that analogy of sports because oftentimes, and I'm a big college football fan, but it's so often people orient too much on the skill position, like the quarterback or the wide receiver, whatever. And it's like, guys, it's the lines, right? The offensive line or the defensive line. You don't have that. You're your host. You can have the world's greatest. You can have Tom Brady, but you have a bad offensive line, you're done.
That's right.
All right. So maybe now talking about, and I do think that this is where, from a macro perspective, as budgets have gotten bigger, it is what we've seen. There's been a huge orientation around like production quality and graphical fidelity and things like that. And we have seen bigger and bigger teams. And so maybe you could talk about this notion about team size and team composition. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think well, what constitutes a team, I think, is anything greater than 3 people together, right? So if you have more than 3 people, probably even 2, you could call it a team, but 3 or plus is probably a good starting point. But where you start seeing some substantial communication overhead is when you have more than 12, I'd say. My sweet spot, I would recommend is 3 to 9 individuals, but sometimes you need to add a couple additional more. But there's some good graphs. If you like go Google and go see, like, if you even try to draw the communication lines between 12 people, it's just an enormous amount of touch points that an individual on a team has to go navigate if you're expected to go coordinate or collaborate with the other people on your team. So keeping your team smaller, and especially when you're more outcome based, is they can build more substantial relationships, trusting relationships, and be able to work more effectively together with less communication overhead. So I kind of lean on that team size so they can be smaller, more nimble, and more trusting in terms of working together. But I think I've seen this kind of affect more things than just your communication overhead. It could be something like your meetings can be extremely difficult to manage or make meaningful if you have too many people in them. So if you're trying to do a stand-up or you're trying to do a retro, or if you have too many people in there, it can be really hard to be constructive. So also, I do try to weigh and consider individuals who might not be so extroverted that they will punch through people talking and try to have their voice heard.
Right.
The more people you have, the less that you're going to hear from some of the more quieter voices that have a ton of value to add. So I'd say when building out an organization, not just the team, try to scale horizontally and not pile more and more people on, and try not to do more vertical if you can. But try to keep that sweet spot of, I'd say, 3 to 9, 3 to 12 people in a team.
Right. And I like this call out because even for me, I have noticed over the last, call it 2 years, where I think that there's been a failure on my part where we've had somebody who actually left our team, and then we're like, oh, this person left the team. We'll try to hire someone else to replace them. But then it's like, wait a minute, the team's actually producing more now. They're moving faster now. Okay, there's something we did wrong, or we didn't fundamentally understand about the team structure or the outputs of the specific team members, because we subtracted, but then we added. And so what happened there? So that was clearly a leadership failure, or a failure for me in terms of trying to understand, wait a minute, we had too many quarterbacks or something along those lines. Yeah. But so maybe we could also dive into this a little bit more. When you do think about a specific team oriented around an outcome, to your point of maybe it's trying to create a specific kind of outcome for procedural content or things like that. Mm-hmm. How do you think about this? So not only the team size, but then how is that team composed? How do you think about that?
So I think of just trying to balance, right? Try to have balance, and then the skills needed to win in their outcome. I think if we tried to break down, so the balance I share is that, and I don't want to go down the EEI or DEI route, but I'd say is like, I've seen some personalities or individuals struggle to connect, or you might have conflict, and trying to resolve those, or either try to reposition people into different teams where they are more compatible, is really important, really just for the people that you have on the team. But then also try to have different perspectives on the same team. So right. I have stories or people where I've seen a team was composed of say all male, and it was all male, and then when you added a couple different perspectives to that team, the dynamic completely shifted, and you started getting some really interesting perspectives. So I'd say that the composition of the team, really try to think of balance when you're looking at the team that you've constructed, and then also what is the target demographic you're trying to address. So if you can build a team that is more representative of your audience, that's a big win. Another component of this that I'd say for composition is, I've seen so many times where, say you have a creative or arts-heavy outcome that you're looking for. So say you're trying to generate a bunch of skins, or say you're trying to generate rewards for post-sale content or post-sale monetization content. in many cases, you have just artists outputting content, right? So they'll build assets, and they won't have support from, say, even technical art or, say, an engineer, and you'll run into all of these downstream second factor, third factor problems where they're constantly breaking the build, or their assets are too large, or the tooling is so heavy or so constrained that they can't actually output as much content as they could. The moment you start having those other disciplines to support each other, they know exactly who to go to. They'd have an engineer at their disposal. They have a technical artist to support them. Suddenly, their output can drastically improve. So again, that balance component of if they have everything they need to win in their outcome or their role or their expectation, you should see some substantial velocity improvements. So I think I covered most of what we wanted to cover in that section.
And maybe I can also just jump in here a little bit as well to just provide my own lessons from my own mistakes, right? Because I've made so many over the last 5 years. But so one of the things that you mentioned in terms of like the team structure and composition, one mistake that we have made was, for example, we had a separate product manager that was kind of overseeing or working with design team and then with engineering. And one of the things that we've done recently is have the same product manager that actually works with both teams. And so then what had happened is that the communications overhead dramatically reduced. And what we used to have was design would throw a spec over to engineering, engineering would do some stuff, and things would get kind of tossed over the fence without enough context and with a lot of this overhead where now that we've got kind of like the same person, we're seeing a lot faster velocity. We're seeing less overhead, less necessary meetings and things of that nature. And then the second, I think, nuance here would be where, as I mentioned before, where I've noticed that we've had addition by subtraction, then it's like really thinking about, okay, if this team's objective is X, what do we actually need? What kind of, to your point, what kind of people, and what do we need to be good at to be able to deliver that the best? And I think there has been too little introspection about your concept of composition. So there's a team size aspect of it, and then on the composition side, what do we actually need, right? We need better O-linemen. We need a good this or that, right? And so I really do think that your point on both of those aspects of really critically thinking about the team is very important.
Agreed. Agreed.
And with that, if you don't have any other comments on that part, I'd really love to now go to your point on a set of principles, right? And there were a lot of them, so maybe we don't go over all of the principles that you mentioned, but if you could point out a few of the principles that you think are important and that you can discuss here, and again, I'll have a link to your full post so people can go through all of them, but I thought you had a lot of great ones, but if you can pick a few, what do you think are some of the key principles that game development leaders and people on a team should really be aware of when they're trying to optimize for success?
So the first one I want to hit home because I've seen this too many times now is in some time I know probably this audience listening is more product and orientation maybe. So maybe this is crazy to you, but in many organizations I've joined, there isn't a clear product vision. So there isn't a clear written, shared,
I don't know what you're talking about, Chris.
regularly provided reminder of what the heck we're building and who it's for. So I've joined.
Just to be clear, I've made that mistake many times, and the thing is, I keep repeating that mistake. So please continue.
Okay. So I've joined organizations where we're trying to build a game. Sure, it's cross-platform, but one of those platforms is mobile. Well, when you're building mobile, you need to have design considerations baked in much earlier. So keep that front and center. If that's an expectation of your team, you could outsource that, and that maybe it's not a problem. But if you're trying to own a particular platform, a demographic, an age, that needs to be captured and echoed through the whole organization, and then also echoed in your organizational structure. So if you're looking at trying to do, you're trying to tailor towards more 9 to 12 audience, kind of 9 to 12-year-olds, that needs to show up in your designs, that needs to show up in what you're making, and to keep the team accountable. I've seen so many times where that has not been the case, and we build a game that doesn't actually service the audience that we're shooting for.
Right.
And that can ladder beyond this. So it's not just like what's the the product spec, but it's more like it's also helpful to know what the actual vision is and to repeat it constantly. So I'd recommend you're doing it, I don't know, monthly, weekly, as often as possible, where you really know and your audience knows, especially your organization, what exactly you're building for, so they can build the right thing that you're expecting. This is all part of trying to drive alignment with all the people that are building your game without having to tell them what to do. If they know what they're building for and why they're building it, they should start making their own decisions in the right way that ladder to what you expect. But if it's only in your head, or only in several people's heads, it's not going to ladder down.
Right.
So I'd start with that. It needs to be super clear. I've seen so many times where teams deviate, or they're building something, or as you have these more autonomous teams operating separately, if they don't have an aligned vision or aligned product definition, they're going to build a different game. So you might have 10 different teams building 10 different games. So
100% agree on that. And this also goes back to that concept of product velocity, right? The more you have that well-articulated vision, the more vector aligned every team is against that. So yeah, definitely want to let you know I completely agree with that.
Awesome. And what I don't mean to say here is that you can't change it. So as you learn new things, as part of some of the principles that I've listed, is like it's really important to iterate and inspect and adapt. This should also happen for your product vision, and all of that, any decision made regarding affecting it should also be rippled out to the whole team. Everybody needs to know what's going on. I think in Team of Teams, they talk about shared consciousness, which is, I'm usually going a shared understanding, but really the idea that the whole organization understands what the leader's intent is, and that they'll hopefully march to it. You might have some other problems with that, but if you don't convey what you're looking for, you have no hope in them doing what you expect, for them to hit your expectations.
Right.
So, and I keep saying you. I guess I'm not talking directly at you, Joe, but
you can be, because it all applies.
But yeah, so that's kind of one of the biggest ones I wanted to hit home, because I've seen it so often. So.
Right.
I could layer into the kind of the next one. I know when I've proposed organizational structures that are outcome oriented and more Scrum, or cross discipline in nature, cross craft in nature, there's an inherent or kind of a immediate rejection that okay, you're going to take our engineers and split them off. You're going to take our designers and they're not going to be coordinating together. Or how are artists going to have any kind of oversight in terms of what the art director's vision is? And I want to hit home that when you do these kinds of pods or craft-based teams, you still need guilds. You still need your craft leaders to be front and center on their crafts. So you should still be doing PR reviews. You should be doing art asset reviews. You should still have regular check-ins, discussions, knowledge sharing across your disciplines where they can benefit. I want to touch on this because I know there's a resistance that, if we get rid of our discipline silos, that we're going to lose that knowledge base, the understanding, expertise in our particular disciplines, and that's not the intent. You should still try to retain that through some system of connection, like a guild.
Right, and Chris, just to kind of pause you real quick. And so when you think about like the potential organizational structure or the mental model that you think about when you think about outcome-based teams and guild leadership, are you thinking about kind of a structure that's kind of matrix in nature, where you've got pods that kind of go horizontally, but then you also have like discipline leads or guild leads that kind of cut vertically, essentially?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what I'm thinking. And matrix-based organizations can get very complicated, but there's only two. I hope there's only two axes there. I think I hope it's just discipline and then your outcome-based teams. But I'm sure you can get more complicated than that. But yes. So I wanted to call that one out as well, because there's a lot of resistance there. And there still is craft guidance, craft management that should still exist across all teams. I'd also want to feed into this knowledge sharing, even across guilds and crafts. So if you have an opportunity to share record, invite anybody who's interested in terms of if you're doing a weekly design check-in, if other crafts are interested, they can benefit from overhearing what other disciplines are facing. So you can elevate that shared consciousness by having more open and honest conversations, more transparency, and then also overlap between disciplines if they're interested and will want to hear more. All right, I think I would probably wrap that piece up around guilds, cross-discipline, having your own kind of matrix organization in that regard.
That was a good one too.
Awesome.
You only have really good points here.
Great.
So yeah, keep going.
All right. So I want to touch on autonomy, which is scary as a leader, and I've also had my own failures of not or overstepping my leadership bounds and not trusting a team. So I think kind of stepping back and going, what is our job if you're more senior roles? We're really shepherds and gardeners of our organization. So if you can give a clear product intent, you have clarity on teams, their roles, their outcomes that are expected of them, and clear expectations. Your job is to make sure you have the right people on those teams to then go execute against what you need. What it isn't, or what I wouldn't recommend, is that you try to dictate almost everything to those teams. You try to empower them. You've given them every resource they need to win. Let them run and let them learn and fail. But also trust and verify. So still verify how they're going. You still need regular check-ins, but try to give them as much autonomy in their space as possible. And what you'll see is, so I'll go back to the football analogy. If the head coach had to make all the calls in the middle of a game, it would be the slowest game and the most ineffective way to run a team. So you need to trust the players on the field to go win in their game. That doesn't mean that you're totally checked out. You're still there. You're still coordinating. You're still giving guidance. There's still strategy. But you're letting the team play. You're letting them run.
I think like this is one of the, I would say like this concept that you're talking about is probably one of the hardest parts, because for me, I think there's so much situational context in this, right? In terms of, okay, is the team junior or are they senior? Do you have alignment? Do you not have alignment? And to some degree, some leaders give so much autonomy that some of these people or these teams are, the way that I've described it, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but kind of like islands that just kind of float off, and they're like, you don't. And so the point that you raised about trust but verify, I also call it the observer effect, where you have some level of like understanding, are we achieving the goals? Are we getting there? And so yeah, to your point, you don't want to completely micro, but there needs to be some macro alignment, and I do think that there needs to be some checks that are situationally constructed, because you could have a team that's senior, that's completely great, and so long as you're like highly aligned, they just get stuff done. Like as an example, we recently hired an art director who is so good. And the only thing, like, I'm even telling him, I want to be less involved, right? Like, you're so much better than me at art. Sure, he keeps sending me stuff, but I'm just like, man, this stuff is awesome. And then there are other teams where the people are so junior that they need more micro. And so, like, I would say, like, the balance between macro and micro does need to be a little bit aligned. But to your point, more generally, as the teams get better and better, so long as you've got like that alignment on vision and like the macro is aligned, I think all the micro, like the ideal scenario is you are completely hands off on the micro.
Yes. Yep. Which I haven't entirely, I don't think I've ever seen that. So I don't think you're ever entirely hands off, but right. So I'd recommend two things. One is actually kind of piggybacking off of what you mentioned was if you have a lot of junior individuals on a team, that goes back to balance. You might want to rebalance that team to have a little bit more senior leadership, or just senior individuals that can help keep them on the rails. So you don't have to. So if you can delegate some of that power down to individuals that you trust, that's also a way to build a balance into the team. But sometimes you can't do that either. Right. And so I've also had to be more involved when needed. So it's an inspect and adapt kind of situation again. So really, when you run into those problems, try to deal with it as much as possible. But if you keep in your mind, how can I keep them as autonomous as possible, then you're probably going to do the right things.
Right. And like one of the concepts that I've talked about before is you go to, like, this is the I forgot the name of the Secretary of Defense from like years back who talked about you go to war with the army you have, not the army you wish you had. And so
Yeah.
sometimes you can have, so sometimes it's like, yeah, we just hire a senior person, but it's like, oh, where is that senior person? Right? So you just have to kind of deal with the situation that you have, to your point.
Agreed. The last piece of that's important is from my Microsoft days, they call it a rhythm of business, which you're establishing kind of a regular cadence of check-ins, reviews, right. Whether it's an MBR or monthly business review, or if you're following more of a Scrum or defined framework like that, they have baked in reviews, right? So as a leader, if you're every sprint able to have a look at both the build, the current status of their backlogs, you're doing regular play testing as leaders, hopefully you're going to catch much earlier, in a regular cadence every 2 weeks. Usually a team can't go too far off into the left field in that timeline. So if you keep a small time box and they're iterating and you have those regular check-ins, you should be able to keep your eye on the ball as far as where the team's at. So, and then give, good candid feedback. That's where I'm also a fan of some of these frameworks, and then staying, close to the team. There are ways to navigate some of those issues, and don't get me wrong, as we'll touch on some of those challenges. There definitely are challenges, so don't get me wrong.
Yeah, and I think that last part is one where, I've talked about this a lot before, but the way that I think about a lot of companies is as, if you think about it in a simple way, people and product. And in my experience, there are so many people that are they have so much complexity on the product, the kinds of analysis, all these fancy ways of examining and optimizing the product. But then, ultimately it's the people that make the product. And so if you're completely ignoring the people and not having feedback to also improve the people, then you might run into problems. And what I've observed is the other way to look at this is the more senior, experienced, and advanced the people, the less process you need. And so then what is the right level of process? Well, this goes back to this discussion about the situational context of the team. The more junior, you should have a little bit more progress checks, different kinds of checks on progress, because they are so junior. And the better your people, the less process, the less all that kind of stuff. And so that's the art. And I think that's the part that is so difficult about what we do, but so also interesting and complex, is navigating exactly how you kind of create these kind of processes and practices that are optimized for the team that you have.
I am so my background being prominently mostly production. Might be crazy for me to say this, but I'm a process minimalist. So whatever I can possibly get away with the least amount of overhead, I will. But as most things, as you find in governmental regulation, is usually when something goes wrong, you try to adapt and try to prevent it.
Yeah, so minimum viable process for the team you have, essentially.
Exactly. Exactly. So you got to adapt per team and per team composition, and that's part of that kind of storming, norming, performing phase, is that you're trying to figure that out. But the more that you change people around or move compositions or move leaders, you will need to reset some of that, because you'll have different kind of levers and strengths per person per team. So it's an ongoing battle. It's never ending, and it will always continue to keep your job interesting.
Right. Okay. Should we go to challenges, or do you have anything else?
I think the last piece here that I wanted to call out is safety. And more psychological safety. And I know this is a buzzword somewhat. And I think it's important to call out that you need to have a group of people who trust each other, feel safe with each other, can have that radical candor, who can be safe in disagreement, or anyone in any role can put their hand up and go, hey, I think this isn't the right call, or I think this is we're going to have some issues down the line, or players might not resonate with this. Having that safety, making sure that leaders model it and your retros reinforce it, is incredibly important. The more quiet a team is, I remember I was in an org where we had a feature kickoff, and our leadership was celebrating that no one had any questions. So, and this was a big system that was being designed and conveyed. And the fact that there were crickets and everybody said, this is great, they were thinking was a good a good sign. And from my perspective, that's horrifying. That means that people are not safe enough to ask questions, to have thoughts. And if you're in game development, you probably have a lot of passion. You probably have a lot of opinions and thoughts, and doesn't mean that you have to share them all, but someone should be able to say something when you're reviewing some piece of content or a system or design or what have you. So I would just want to call that out, that there are real tangibles around psychological safety, that if you're not seeing the components of that, you will not have a very performant team, and you will likely miss some icebergs that you're sailing right at. So I wanted to call that last piece out.
Yeah, and just to also add a little bit of my thoughts on that as well. So I had the opportunity when I went to business school to actually go abroad and study in Japan. And I went to this university in Japan where one of the professors is a guy by the name of Ikujiro Nonaka, who kind of came up with the concept of Scrum. I mean, he didn't come up with the specific practices, but the idea of Scrum. And he actually also had this concept that he called dialectical synthesis. And essentially, the idea of this concept is that the only way to achieve new knowledge is by having like completely opposite perspectives or opinions on something. And then you discuss and debate, and there's like this kind of whirlwind that happens. And then through that discussion and debate, you reach a new insight, a new knowledge that can help create a better product. And to your point, like I have been part of so many teams where it's weird. Like there were some companies where, there'd be a big room of people discussing something. And essentially what would happen is the highest ranked person in the room would say something. And then maybe somebody else who's higher up would say something else. And everyone would just change their opinion and change their thoughts to whoever the highest ranking person in the room is and agree with that person. And I just, like in some of those memes, I was just like, this is so weird. This is so bad. I need to get the hell out of this. It's just like, what is going on here? But I do think that is a common problem in our industry where because of the safety issue and because like people just want to get ahead and like, it's like, oh, if you agree with me, then I'm going to promote you. Like that kind of culture is just so bad. But unfortunately, I do think it is a bit common in some companies.
It's extremely common, I'd say, in my experience as well. I read a book recently, Team of Rivals, about Abraham Lincoln and his ability to form a team of actual rivals that really wanted to kind of undermine him in some ways. And so much of what he was able to overcome with a rival is that he built trust and would stand by them and listen to them and empower the hell out of them. And when you see that kind of an environment, I think Google did a study on this too, about like the health of a team will skyrocket and the performance of that team if they trust each other. So I know I hear that sometimes, like everything starts with trust, and it's like, but it's real. It really is real. If you can build that and build a culture where people can talk and speak up and advocate for their ideas, you're going to have way better outcomes. So yeah, I totally agree. I'd never heard of that though before. That's why I listened to your podcast.
Thanks. Yeah, and I also think like there's too many times I think leaders really do need to emphasize, like for me personally, like we're a startup. If our product fails, everybody's time, energy, and effort gets wasted. So like, I don't want to win a debate. I want to win the product, right? Because like ultimately, if the product succeeds, then everybody wins. I win. I don't really care about losing an argument. I want the product to be better. And so many people too many leaders let their ego get in the way.
Yeah.
And it's so unfortunate.
Yep.
All right. Should we go to challenges?
I think that's great. Yeah. So my wife asked me why this happens, and I actually don't know, so I'd love to know what you think, is this idea of cognitive dissonance, where a leader believes that they are doing the right things, but it's not actually lived. So you're not actually seeing it executed. So, and this is common if you're a prior Scrum Master or somebody who's trying to roll out Agile. You can have a common conversation with someone where you'll ask them like, are you running Agile? Or what kind of Agile? Or what's your framework? And they'll go, yeah, we're totally Agile. We change our plans all the time. And it's like, well, that's not what Agile stands for. It's a set of values and principles that you try to enforce across your organization. But in their head, they truly believe that they are, right? So they think that they're actually doing the thing that they're saying. And in many cases, this happens all over the place, right? So they might think that they have designed a system of humans or an organizational structure that is actually outcome or product oriented or healthy. And yet you look at it and things like they're moving people all the time so that you're resetting constantly that cycle of storming, norming, performing, or you'll have more strike teams that are temporary so people don't get anchored together well, or they could be more a kind of bucket or area oriented where you'll have a systems team that's bottlenecking everybody and they won't try to address it. So I think there's these areas where cognitive dissonance can be very dangerous, where you think that you're doing something right, and I'm sure I probably have done it, and yet in practicality, you're failing. So I think I wanted to call that out of that. It's really important that as leaders we keep looking at ourselves and getting feedback. I'm a huge proponent of trying to take a pulse of the organization and try to listen to your boots on the ground, your frontline workers. Around what things are going well, not going well, and try to constantly adapt to it. So I think even with a great outcome-oriented organization, you still need to challenge yourself and go, I don't know if this is still good enough, and constantly try to improve. So that has been a challenge I've seen, and I'm curious, Joe, if you've run into something similar.
Yes, and I think for me, there's probably 3 concepts associated with this phenomenon that you're talking about, in my opinion. I think the first is you actually know what's wrong, but nobody wants to admit it. And especially in organizations where there's high, there's high pressure. Mm-hmm. And if you admit the mistake, then that could have political consequences for you, or there's an ego issue, right? So like you kind of know the mistake, but you don't want to admit it. I think that's one part of this. I think the second thing has to do with this notion of progress checks and really checking to see, okay, we made a change or we're doing things in a certain way. And that level of introspection where you think about, okay, we are doing things in a specific way. Is that effective or not? And actually trying to check and measure, is the way that we're doing things better or best, or are we doing it this way because we did it this way in the last project, or people are comfortable with this specific approach? But we live, like, we're operating in one of the most dynamic and competitive industries in the world, right?
Yes.
And so like not having that level of both introspection and checking to see, is this effective, is the second part. And then I think the third part I kind of wrote about in the last newsletter, which was this notion of the alien's eye view concept, which is what you think you're doing and what you're actually doing could be something different.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Right? So I think for me, those are kind of like the 3 concepts associated with this phenomenon, this challenge that you're talking about. And certainly I do think more people should really be thinking critically about these things. And again, high praise for you and for your post, but this is another reason why I loved your post so much. But
awesome.
Yeah.
Hopefully it resonates with others too, because I think if we can try to navigate some of these challenges together as an industry, we'll come out the other side much healthier.
Right. Absolutely.
There was one other challenge I wanted to share, because I know this is a common, almost one of the first things that'll happen if I try to present an organizational structure that is cross-discipline in nature, is you can't have a specialist on every team, which is legitimate. You can't. It's untenable. You can't do it. So, for example, for one of these would be you can't have a UI artist on every team that's working on front end, and that's a legitimate challenge. So, what I would recommend to try to navigate this, and there's plenty of disciplines in game development where you can only have a certain amount of them. There's 2 ways to navigate, and if you look at the article and look at the org, I've dubbed a team called the Catalyst that can kind of come in, airdrop in, and support a team in their respective outcome by supplying their skills for maybe a temporary amount of time. But they still have an identity. They still have a Catalyst team that they can rally around and still have a connection with regularly. So that's one way to navigate that problem of you have all these specialist needs, but then how do you support each team that needs them, is try to airdrop from another team. I'd also encourage that it is healthy and good for an outcome-based team to support a different team. It gives empathy, understanding. They understand what each other is working on, their priorities, and suddenly they'll get more kind of back and forth. How can we support each other in the future? And more kind of transparency there is very healthy. So I would say even if you embed which I would recommend. Embed a discipline-based resource onto a team. It's okay if that team supports other teams. They should. I think it's a really healthy dynamic. So those are the two things I would recommend if you run to that challenge of, we can't have an audio designer in every team that needs one. Then try to do some kind of a hybrid model. And I'm also open to ideas on how to navigate it too, because it's almost always imperfect. But
and I think to your point, Chris, kind of like the challenge with what you're talking about. And I think, and by the way, as somebody who is not great at this, but who's trying to get better, is that I think that when we look at the overall macro and potential sources for alpha or competitive advantage, a lot of what you're advocating for, if we just kind of step back for a moment and think about what you're advocating in terms of how we can be more effective, is really kind of, if we think from a high level, it's advocating for a team that is much more fluid in nature.
Yes.
Like if I were, quoting Bruce Lee, it'd be like, be like water,
Yes.
But like so often, like the game development philosophy structure that most people have experienced in the past is very rigid, right?
Yes.
And I think the ultimate expression of this is like if you see how like an Ubisoft team works. Very specifically siloed, very structured, very rigid. You only do this. Don't talk to these other teams. If you want to talk to that person, you talk to this. And I guess what I'm saying is like what you're advocating for, I think is right, but I also think is very difficult because it requires a change in mindset, but also requires a change in skill in how you think about things and the things that you think about, so you can kind of dynamically adapt and make your team as efficient and effective as possible. So on that side, do you have any thoughts or specific processes or ways in which, I mean, one thing I have advocated for is, when we haven't talked about AI, and I thought we could get through this conversation without talking about AI, but one of the things that I feel is important with the impact of AI in game teams is having kind of the notion of a role of an orchestrator, of somebody who can kind of go in and think about how do we apply AI to different teams in different ways, different capabilities emerge, and then how you apply it. But to some degree, that person, whether it's a producer or a PM, it feels like there needs to be somebody who's thinking about these issues, who's thinking about how do you make who like really looks at the organizational structure, shifting one team to do another thing. Like that kind of a person or that kind of a function seems necessary. I haven't seen that, and we kind of just try to do our best, but it seems like that should be something that teams think a little bit more about.
I totally agree. Well, so as a producer, I would advocate for having some production staff that can help you with that. Like EA has development directors that are almost entirely focused on. I don't know if they're focused on organizational structure, but certainly on your project management side of things. But I think what's really important is to do that. Someone should be looking at your organization, looking at how can we optimize, how are people working together, and can we improve it always. And if it's it could be on a leader, it could be on production, it could be on a discipline. But I agree. I wholeheartedly agree with you that it should be a capability or a focus as an organization if you want to optimize your team.
Okay, and Chris, one of the last things that you included in your post was an example organizational structure. And I'm really glad that you actually provided like a concrete example. And again, as somebody who's working on a shooter game, I thought it was awesome that you provided an example for what you were calling a AA shooter team. Could you walk us through how you kind of came up with that structure? Maybe you could describe the structure itself and some of the thought process behind that organization.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go over the shooter org topology. I'll start with the different teams that are on it, and so hopefully it'll kind of come together in your mind. First would be combat oriented. So a combat oriented team, an enemies or opponents team, expeditions, or you could do worlds or levels or missions team, but expeditions team, a meta team, foundations and multiplayer team, and then a catalysts team. So I kind of hinted at catalysts previously, but those are specialists that would need to be kind of airdropped in to support each one of those other teams. So how did I come up with these? And there are some outcome texts that I've listed, and I can read them off later if needed. But I came up with them by thinking through the product first. So in this case, I was thinking like Left 4 Dead, like a Left 4 Dead game. Or I didn't really think about an extraction shooter, but there was also some really good. This could be a Helldivers type style team or something like that. But what are the core or what are the core areas of the game for it to be successful, and how can I anchor people around it, and what's most likely not going to change? So unless you totally change the game, the genre, most likely all of these will be needed forever. So you could anchor people on these areas to get good at them, build relationships, and then start executing very well around combat, enemies, expeditions, meta, foundations, multiplayer, and catalysts. So the idea is that how do I map these humans to the product that we're trying to build, and they have really clear understanding of what their roles, what's important to them and their focus, and how can they support each other in executing in it.
So essentially, it kind of sounds like what you're saying, Chris, is that you're looking at a product, and I think it's an important point to underscore that you're starting from the product, trying to understand what are the key capabilities, features, or things that are necessary for this game to actually be good. So what are those important levers, important things, and then you're trying to construct teams around those things to make sure that those are good, because those are the things that would probably drive the success of the game the most. Is that right? Okay?
That's exactly right. That's a great summary. Instead of starting with what disciplines are most likely needed, it's oriented around, here's your product idea. How can we best build an organization that can succeed in building that product? I think in your case, we could morph this a bit. You likely need people focused on live ops and economy, so maybe a marketplace team. Also, backend is going to be a component of this. So there are different capabilities that you'd probably want included in this outcome-oriented structure that will make sure that when you ship your game, you have everything needed to be successful at it. The more traditional approach to this is trying to come up with all of your features ahead of time in a big plan, and then try to come up with your scope and capacity and estimate all this at day one, and then hire all the people you need in pre-production, scaling into production. And that is rife with so many problems, as far as most likely the product's going to change, most likely the people you need likely will change, even the capabilities of the product will change. So trying to start with that comprehensive of a plan up front versus looking at the people in your product can have much better outcomes if you focus on more of like, what are the product areas? How are you arming the right people to win in those respective areas? And then you'll also get some really good early signals of how much is this going to cost? How many people do we need? And how much focus needs to be there.
Right.
So,
and maybe one other follow-up question I have on this topic is the notion of for example, if you have a big product like a shooter game, you certainly would want to hire a lot of folks there, and you might have a big team of like 40 people that you could specifically dedicate to those teams. But one thing I actually also did recently is I studied what are successful games, more on the PC side actually, and so looked at a lot of these teams where it seemed like a lot of teams that were successful in Western game development were actually some of the smaller teams. And so if you have a team of, let's say, between 10 to 15 people, but you might also have 5 specific outcomes that you're looking to optimize against, how would you recommend with a small team of like 10 people, would you have people dedicated to one of those teams? Would you split them? How would you think about that kind of a structure?
With that small, you're almost within that kind of team size of the sweet spot already. So it's almost like everybody, when you're that small, I'm not sure if I would separate them into even smaller teams. I think I would probably keep them more aligned. Or what you could do is you could separate, say, for example, maybe into 2 teams. Maybe you could have 2 teams of individuals that are focused on, I don't know, in-game or out-game. Or you could do You could think of different compositions where you could split that team down to give more focus. But when you're 10 people, it's almost like you already have all that baked in scrappiness, transparency. You're working with each other. Hopefully, you're able to balance the various different priorities and needs. What's just important there is to have that clear product vision and make sure everybody's marching towards it.
And this kind of goes back to the notion that we talked about around situational context, as well as thinking about how do you orchestrate and how do you structure the team given what you have, right?
Yep.
And I'm sure there's potential solves for this too, where you have a team, but that team may be evaluated against, well, we do need like a great, dynamic difficulty adjustment system or a procedural generation thing. And so you could have different outcomes that are assigned to a team and you track progress against those rather than having like a bigger team where you dedicate teams against those objectives, for example.
Exactly. I totally agree. And plus, I think in those smaller teams, it's more common when you have more generalists. You have people wearing a lot more different hats. So you might have a narrative designer that's also an audio designer. So I think Claire Obscure was an excellent example of everyone coming together to go ship that game with a relatively small group of people, and wearing different discipline hats. So I think it really depends. But as you called out, I wouldn't ask you or submit to you that this organizational structure is exactly what you should do. It gives you the right thought of like, how can we organize people to give them enough clarity to go win at their product. So I would even say this is probably too over considered for a smaller team like that.
Right. And so to your point, I think that the thing that I like, and maybe we should underscore, is that there are a lot of important principles that you have written about, but then you got to apply those principles. And the example is a specific example, but then you got to apply it in the right way. So it's not like the other mistake you see a lot is like, oh, this game, it's like the shiny new object phenomenon, right? It's like this game came out, oh, we're going to just take that and we're going to apply it to our game, but not thinking about how do you actually translate that or whether it fits, things like that.
Exactly. Yep.
All right. Well, Chris, I think that, I definitely want to thank you for giving us your insights. Maybe before we close, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, what's up with you currently. And then if people wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way for people to get in touch, maybe regarding this post or anything else?
Well, thanks, Joe. This has been so much fun. I hope there's more opportunity to discuss about so many of these different topics. And honestly, I'm open to talking to anybody about what I've written in the article, or if you have any questions of what we talked about today, I'm available and would love to speak with you. So either reach me on LinkedIn or chris.casanova@outlook.com to have a look at the article. And also, please, I'd love to swap notes, share, your thoughts on how to make, teams healthier and make games, even better. I would say is that like, the most rewarding part of my career has been to help teams find the rhythm. So when you can have people that are happy, they have clarity, and they're kicking ass, it's so much fun to see that kind of outcome. So I'm happy to help any team that's looking to navigate that ever ongoing problem space. So hopefully we can build some great games together. And I am currently looking for my next role, and so I'm happy to talk to anybody about future opportunities and how I can help the organization. So thank you so much for the time, Joe. It was awesome. I'm a huge fan of your work and your podcast, and it's been an honor to be on here.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Chris. And I definitely hope you come back on again. There's so many things that I think we can talk about, and so few people going deep in terms of like game development and how we can all improve, which we critically need to do given the current landscape. And so with that, for our audience, thanks for joining, and we will catch you next time. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
If you like the Gamemakers content, and if you found value in what you saw today, then please do me a huge favor. Become a part of the Gamemakers community by hitting the subscribe button. You'll get notified of some of the really great content that's coming up, and the bigger the channel gets, the better the guests I'll be able to get as well. Also comment and let me know what you think. So don't forget to like, to subscribe. Thank you so much, and until next time.